Hi, it's John from Cloud Formations again. I'm going to be showing you a good method of checking if a pipeline is running. So the first thing I did was check the internet to see how to do it. I couldn't find a really good example of doing it with Fabric, but this guy, this handsome fellow here, has got a method of doing it in Azure. Now it's slightly different because we don't need to, for example, get subscription or resource group names because we don't have that. I guess resource group name is the workspace ID. But I'm going to show you how to do it on Fabric owner level. So here we are in Fabric. I've got a pipeline which I'm going to use to check the status of another pipeline. This is the pipeline to check. Nothing very complicated. It is just basically wait for 3 minutes or so. Gives us enough time. So the components of this pipeline are, well, 3 main sections. The first 3 items here are getting our service principal ID and secret and tenant ID from our key vault, and then the actual process of checking the pipeline status is these 2 sections. So first we hit the API to get an authentication token, then we hit the API to get a status on a particular pipeline. So what are the prerequisites for this? So for the web get token and get pipeline status, we need 2 things, and that's a connection. So if we jump over to connections, I have a Fabric API and an Entra token API. So first of all, we hit Entra to get an authentication token, then we hit the Fabric API to get the status of the pipeline, and they're very straightforward. So you need a Web 2 connection. Let's have a look at the settings. With just a login path of login.microsoftonline.com, authentication anonymous, that's fine. And a Fabric API one, very similar, hitting API fabric.microsoft.com. Again, don't worry about anything else. Those 2 connections are fairly straightforward to set up. So let's go back to the pipeline, and what do we effectively need to do? Well, first of all, in our get token for authentication, we need to do a couple of things. So there's a connection, there's a body and a header. So for our relative URL, we're just concatenated along the connection of microsoftonline.com for Entra. We get our tenant ID, our output value from our get tenant ID from the key vault, OAuth2 v2 token, and that is the path we're going to be sending to that connection. The next thing is in the body, we've got a couple of things we're going to throw in here. Grant type is called credentials. Again, we can get the service principal ID here, output value, and get our service principal secret there, and then the scope which we need to provide is the API .fabric.microsoft.com. That's the scope of the token credential that's going to be used. And then we have our content type here, which will be used in the header going forward. And once we've got all these items, we're going to get our pipeline status itself. Now we do need a couple of things here. We do need to get one, the workspace ID. I'm just getting pipeline data factory, which will bring back the ID of the particular workspace, which is this bit up here at the moment. And then the pipeline ID. So we do need the pipeline ID of the pipeline we're going to check, and then job instances. And in all the rest of it, it's a get method. So we've got our web token we're going to provide from our previous stage to authenticate, and the content type in there. So we have a post and a get, and then it will return something. Now, what we'll be returning in the web get pipeline status will be the last 100 times the pipeline's run. It will return that bit of data, and then we'll just check to see what the status is. And in the filter here, we get once we get all the results, we're going to get the items from our get pipeline status output value, and then check for anything that's a status of in progress. So okay. So I've run this pipeline just to make sure it succeeded and successfully. It's waited for 3 minutes, and let's have a run of this one. should give you an idea of the outputs we're looking for. So the pipeline now has now run. Let's look at the output. Okay, so there's been a instance of it, it's run, and the status is completed. So brilliant, it's not running, it's now done its thing. So let's close this. Let's run this pipeline. So we know this is now running. Cool. The status queued. I'll wait to get into progress. There we go. So let's run this one. Cool. Let's have a look at get pipeline status again. Let's have a look. There you go. Status is in progress. So we can now see what's running, and all we're going to do after that is just look for any sort of in progress status in the history. Obviously you won't have more than one thing with in progress in the history for the runs. Brilliant. So we can see now the pipeline's run successfully, and so we've got a filter here to say do something if it is running or not. Okay, so there's a couple of important parts here to remember. One is connections to get to Entra, to Authenticate, to get your token, then to get the pipeline status. And as I mentioned, we do need the pipeline ID to get the status of that particular pipeline. Here I've got a parameter. Again, you can have a primary pipeline, which calls this a secondary pipeline and passes in some values that you need to check. And then there's a filter in progress. So when we do get the results from get pipeline status, so look at this again, we know how to filter on to see if something is still running. Maybe you want something that's not started to filter on and in progress, so we know that the pipeline is spinning up, and when in progress it's fully in progress. That's obviously completed is you're not worried about anything completed. Yeah, just be careful that initially when you run it and it may not have any history, you'll just get this bit back. So maybe add some extra validation if it's a pipeline that's not run before or for quite a while. The history won't be preserved. So that's a very good method of checking to see if the pipeline is running. You can possibly do this now with a Fabric user data function, calling the API. You could use that in pipeline, hit the user data function, which will call the API and return some values for you. As the user data function now supports variable libraries and key vault. So from the key vault, you could get your Salesforce principal ID and secret and tenant ID securely into the user data function, which could then poll the API, which could then return something. And maybe you could have the same thing that polls it continuously, so you can get a continuous status every n amount of times if needed. But hopefully that's a nice little method of checking to see if a pipeline is running. Any questions, add in the comments below and we'll get back to you. Thank you.